7 straight wins in the Tour de France, 7 years since Lance Armstrong confirmed to Oprah Winfrey he cheated. Jeremy Schaap chronicled many of Armstrong's triumphs when they were that, and he is with us now on SportsCenter. Jeremy, inside the sport, the innuendo around Armstrong was pretty powerful. Why do you suppose so many chose to side with Armstrong's clean version of the story for so long?
Well, I think if you're talking about inside the peloton, it was simply because most everyone, we can't say everyone definitively, but the vast majority, we're talking about 90% or above, we believe was probably doping as well. And in that sport at that time, the prevalence of doping, it was so great that, in one respect, when you look at the transgressions of Lance Armstrong, you just say to yourself, he was doing what everybody else was doing. So it was unlikely to see other riders at that time calling out anyone because so many were tarnished, John.
These 4 hours, Lance, the documentary, is very much an Armstrong retelling of things, a truthful, maybe 2020 account. What do you suppose he gets out of this?
I don't know what Lance Armstrong gets out of this. I think, hearing him talk about it now, 7 years after this fall from grace, being knocked off the pedestal, this spectacular downfall, has it humanized him? Yeah, there are moments. Lance Armstrong is a very compelling guy, and he can be a very persuasive guy as well. But, you also see the hard-charging, aggressive nature, and you see that it's hard for him, it seems. Sometimes he seems to be going through the motions of contrition or regretfulness. But I think one of the things that you come away with, John, after watching this film, which I thought was really good, is that he doesn't really think the punishment fit the crime. He thinks, hey, everybody was doing it. I was one of everyone. But the other bucket of these things that he did wrong is the way that he went after people, and he hounded people like David Walsh and Emma O'Reilly and the Andreus and Greg LeMond as well, which is dealt with in the film. So it's a very interesting character study about one of the most fascinating athletes of our time.
I've always felt that people are angrier about the lies and the lawsuits and his abuse of power and tearing people down than they were about EPO and the drug use. What's your thought on that line of thinking?
I think you're exactly right because of what we've been talking about. The fact is that if you happen to have been born at that time, and even before that time in cycling, it's not as if, this generation that came to prominence in the 1990s was the first to have doped in cycling. It has a long history in the sport. But if you're someone like Lance Armstrong, you're one of these elite cyclists in that era, as we were saying, frankly, you couldn't expect to win the Tour de France. You couldn't expect to win any of the great competitions in the sport if you weren't doing EPO while everyone else was doing it. So you put that in one category, but it is the other stuff, the litigiousness, the name calling, the character assassination, all of that, which, Lance Armstrong, apologizes for in the film. Those are the things that are less forgivable or unforgivable, if you will.
So you've seen it. Was there something in particular that you wanted to hear from Armstrong or have explained in these 4 hours that you got out of this that stuck with you?
I can't say there was one thing in particular, John, that I was looking for, but there were certainly things that stick with me having watched it a few days ago for the first time. And I think one of them is when the director asks him his feelings about being relevant again and how he might want to be relevant again after what's happened over the course of the last 7 years, this spectacular downfall. And he's like, well, I know this is going to sound bad, but I am relevant. It matters to Lance Armstrong to be relevant. And again, he wasn't just some superstar. There was almost a religious fervor among the people who idolized him. And again, it goes back to the way that he beat cancer himself and the way that he inspired millions of people. And the film deals with that as well. And I think the impact of the Livestrong Foundation, the impact on individual lives and on that community, it's hard to overstate. But it's It's an interesting picture of a complex, sometimes contradictory, very, I mean, that's an understatement, hard-charging athlete.
Yeah, hard to overstate and sometimes hard to square that deceit with all the good that his winning at the time fostered. Jeremy Schaap discussing Lance Armstrong on the eve of part 1 of Lance on ESPN. Thank you, Jeremy.
Thanks, John.
Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.